Results of Scientific Employment. In a lecture to the students of the New York Edison Company Commercial School on January 20, 1915, afterward also presented at the Third Annual Convention of the National Association of Corporation Schools at Worcester, Massachusetts, on June 9, 1915, Herman Schneider, Dean of the College of Engineering of the University of Cincinnati, in discussing the problem of selecting the right job, made the following statement. 2. Physical characteristics. This seems to be a development of the old idea of phrenology. It is claimed in this system that physical characteristics indicate certain abilities. For example, a directive, money-making executive will have a certain shaped head and hand. A number of money-making executives were picked at random, and their physical characteristics charted. We do not find that they conform at all to any law. Also, we found men who had physical characteristics that ought to make them executives, but they were anything but executives. A number of tests of this kind gave negative results. We were forced to the conclusion that this system was not reliable. It is of exceeding great importance for us to know whether the conclusion of Dean Schneider is to be accepted as final. He is a man of high attainment and has done some most remarkable and highly commendable work in connection with continuation schools in the city of Cincinnati. His opinion and conclusion, therefore, are worthy of the most careful consideration. At first glance, Dean Schneider's method of investigation seemed sound and his statement, therefore, conclusive. He examined actual cases, he collected evidence, and he found that physical characteristics were not a reliable guide to aptitudes and character. It is well for us, however, to remember in discussing problems of this kind, that every new scientific discovery has always been rejected by many recognized authorities after what they considered to be careful and convincing tests. Harvey nearly died in trying to maintain his theory of the circulation of the blood. Darwin's theory was insistently repudiated and rejected by many scientific men of his day. Galileo, Columbus, Boyle Lard, the discoverer of the convolution of Broca, and Stephenson, the inventor of the steam locomotive engine, failed to convince the recognized authorities of their times. Gall, who localized the motor functions of the brain, a discovery universally accepted by all brain physiologists today, was laughed out of court by men of the highest scientific authority who, by experiments, proved that he was wrong. So great a mathematician and scientist as Professor Simon Newcomb made the emphatic remark that the dream of flight in a heavier-than-air machine was absurd and would never be realized. The difficulty with all these conclusions lay in the fact that the much-vaunted proof was negative in character. Nothing is easier or more fallacious, logically, than to prove that a thing is not so. The difficulty lies in proving that it is so, therefore, logically sound. According to logicians, conclusions based upon negative premises are inherently unsound. In order to reach reliable conclusions, we must first have all of the essential facts in the case. We question seriously whether this was possible in the course of such a brief investigation as Dean Schneider made. Scientific selection of employees according to the science of character analysis by the observational method was first proposed in the summer of 1912, so that Dean Schneider has had only 3 years, during which he was much occupied with other duties, in which to make his observations. We only wish here to raise the question as to whether, in that short time, he could obtain all of the facts necessary for reaching a final conclusion. At any rate, other scientists have spent at least 15 or 20 years in the examination of the same facts before reaching their conclusions. The method employed as outlined in the paragraph quoted does not seem to fulfill all of the necessary requirements of a careful and complete scientific investigation. Take, for example, the test of directive money-making executives. Would Dean Schneider, or any other engineer, permit a layman, no matter how well qualified otherwise, to examine 20 or 30 different pieces of engineering work for the purpose of determining whether or not they conform to any law? We acknowledge Dean Schneider's ability as an engineer and as an educator, but until he has submitted proof, we must question his ability and training as an observer of physical characteristics as indicative of character and aptitudes. Again, take the tests of those who have the characteristics that ought to make them executives. We should like to know what these physical characteristics were. We should also like to know what other physical characteristics these men had. Perhaps there were some which interfered seriously with their becoming successful as executives. Still further, it would be illuminating to know whether the men so examined had ever been properly trained for executive work, whether they had had opportunities to become executives, or whether some or all of them may not have been misfits in whatever they were doing. Obviously, a sound, scientific conclusion cannot be reached until all of the variables in the problem have been adequately studied and brought under control. There is no evidence in the paragraph that we have quoted that Dean Schneider had done this. But after all, we shall proceed very little, if any, with our inquiry as to the reliability of Dean Schneider's conclusions if we content ourselves merely with criticizing his methods of research and reason. Even if we could prove beyond a doubt that the methods used were unscientific and the reasoning unsound, we could go no further toward establishing the contrary of Dean Schneider's conclusion than he has in establishing the unreliability of determining mental aptitudes and character by an observation of physical characteristics. The main question is not, is Dean Schneider right or wrong? But rather, is an employment department conducted along the lines laid down in the preceding chapter a profitable investment, and, especially, is it possible to determine the right job for any individual by observing his physical characteristics? But it is being done. Fortunately, this question is no longer academic. There is no need for the bringing up of arguments, the stating of theories, the quoting of authorities, or any such controversial methods. Employment departments have been established in a number of commercial and industrial organizations, some very large, some small, and are being conducted, with some variations, according to the plan outlined in the preceding chapter. The science of character analysis by the observational method is the basis of their work. In addition, this science is the basis of employment work in several hundred other employment departments, large and small, where the Blackford Plan has not been adopted in its entirety. The plan referred to was formulated in 1912. The fact that this method has been in actual commercial use under widely varying conditions and in the hands of many different individuals for more than 3 years is, on the face of it, a reasonably fair presumption of its reliability. At any rate, it is fully as convincing as Dean Schneider's purely negative proof. The question remains as to whether the commercial applications of this method are successful, whether the results obtained are reliable, whether the inefficiencies and losses, to which we have referred in previous chapters, are appreciably remedied by its use. Some practical results. In one of the first organizations where the Blackford Employment Plan was installed, there were employed about 2,500 men and women. At the time of the adoption of this plan, the various foremen and superintendents in the plant were hiring about 6,600 new employees each year in order to maintain their regular working force of 2,500. Within 6 months, new employees were being taken on at the rate of only 4,080 a year, and this notwithstanding the fact that many changes were necessitated by sweeping reorganization and adoption of new methods of manufacture in the industry. Excellent results were obtained in reassignment of executives as the result of a careful analysis of those holding positions, when the department was installed. One executive instantly recognized as being clever, designing, and essentially dishonest was replaced by another of a reliable, efficient type. Under the new executive, the department more than doubled its output, at the same time cutting the payroll of the department down to 43% of its former size. Still another executive, holding a position of highest trust and responsibility, was reported upon adversely after analysis by the Employment Department. An investigation made as the result of this report revealed serious irregularities covering a long period of months. Another man properly qualified for the position was selected by the department and immediately began to effect noticeable savings, as well as greatly increasing the value of the department's work in the institution. Still another executive selected by this department increased the output of one of the shops by 120%, with a very slight increase in the payroll. In another organization, careful records showed that among employees selected according to this plan, 90% were efficient, satisfactory, and permanent, 8% fairly satisfactory but not permanent, and 2% unsatisfactory and discharged. An unusual harmony of judgment. But these results, while desirable, are not wholly convincing. It is easy enough to explain them on the ground that any man or woman of common sense, keen observation, and good judgment, devoting all his or her intelligence and time to employment problems, might have gained the same results without using a method for determining aptitudes and character from an observation of physical characteristics. More specific and more convincing evidence may be found in a series of incidents which occurred in connection with an employment department established in a textile factory employing 1,200 men located in New England. The supervisor of this department is a young man who has been a student and practitioner of this method in employment work since August 1912. Previously to taking up this work, he had taken an engineer's degree and had some experience as an executive in a large factory. In January 1915, the supervisor analyzed carefully 20 executives then at work in the plant, carefully wrote out the analysis, and submitted them to the management with recommendations for transfers and readjustments of rather a sweeping nature. The management, wishing to make an experiment, agreed to make the changes, provided we were also to analyze the executives in question, submit our analyses in writing, and show agreement as to the character and aptitudes of the men. We accordingly proceeded to the factory, and there, without consultation with the supervisor or his report, proceeded to analyze the 20 executives independently. It would not be fair to the executives in question to publish all of these analyses in full, but a comparison of the essential points in a few of them will be instructive. Supervisor says of number 1, sociable, scheming, secretive, poor judge of men, lacking seriously in executive ability, decidedly a one-man job man, does not plan ahead, clannish, narrow-minded, very low intelligence for a foreman. Any organization he builds will be close-mouthed, unreliable, and selfish in structure. Because of the technical knowledge of the business which he has gained, and which can be gained only by long experience, he should do good work in experimental lines. Any change made, however, should separate him completely from the regular productive organization. Dr. Blackford reports on number 1. He is, however, an undesirable man to be in charge of others. He is far more destructive than constructive, more disorganizing than organizing. He is ultra-conservative, non-progressive, and is not disposed to take on any new methods unless he himself can get the credit for their installation. In disposition, he is stubborn and obstinate. He is also reserved and suspicious. Being of the selfish type, he will look after his own interests first in all things. Number 1 lacks straightforwardness and frankness of disposition, so he will be tricky, slippery, and do things in an underhanded way. He has very great dislike of detail and will have a tendency to procrastinate if given an opportunity. I believe he has passed the age limit of mental growth. Supervisor thus summarizes number 2. A well-intentioned, honest, and reliable man, lacking absolutely in executive ability. Should have a job as inspector or like, where he would have no one to look after but himself. Dr. Blackford says of number 2. Number 2 is a simple-hearted man of very ordinary ability. He is not systematic or orderly, is very susceptible to criticism, exceedingly emotional, apprehensive, and watchful. No doubt men will like him because he is easy with them. However, he will not be a particularly good executive because he cannot maintain discipline. Supervisor thus analyzes number 3. Very clannish, lacking absolutely in intelligence, executive ability, frankness, in fact, every attribute that is necessary for a good foreman. Is wholly unfitted for an executive job of any kind. Under very strict supervision, would make a fair workman. Dr. Blackford reports on number 3. He is easily influenced, too undependable, and too lax in discipline to make a good executive. He has a keen sense of right and wrong, but will take on the color of his surroundings. If led by an undesirable man, he will be a poor asset, and only a fair one even under good influence. Supervisor on number 4. An active, honest, and frank man, a good boss for a small gang of men. Limited somewhat by lack of education and medium planning ability. Dr. Blackford on number 4. An energetic, active man of only fair intelligence and capability. He is sympathetic and generous to those he likes, but his strongest quality is a desire to rule. He will enjoy enforcing laws, rules, and regulations, and will do this with a degree of energy and watchfulness which probably results in good work on part of those under him. He is a fair executive. Under right influence, might further develop. Supervisor reports on number 5. A capable man, secretive and somewhat clannish, is susceptible, however, to other influences and can be developed. A little quick-tempered in handling help, expects too much at the outset. This man must be removed from the influence of number 1 or he will make no progress. Dr. Blackford on number 5. A capable man, secretive in his work, careful, conservative, and conservatively progressive. He is intelligent and industrious. He is also ambitious and has good artistic sense. He is the type of man that takes pride in doing good work. He will prefer his work to be perfect and finished rather than faulty. In disposition, he is usually mild, but has a very destructive temper when aroused, so he is probably a little hot-headed with his workers. He is reserved and secretive, but under encouragement will unfold whatever information he has concerning the work. Perhaps his most negative point is a lack of courage in his convictions, but with encouragement and proper support, he ought to develop into a good executive. Supervisor says, briefly, of number 6. A very loyal, honest, and painstaking employee, very sincere and absolutely reliable, lacking somewhat in executive ability to handle a large gang. Very desirable. Dr. Blackford says, more at length, of number 6. Industrious, energetic, watchful, careful, dependable, and conscientious in her work. She is sympathetic, but exacting with her workers. She has fair intelligence, is teachable, and will give considerable thought to improving her work. She is also a good critic and a good judge of values. If not given too large a department or too great responsibility, she ought to be very valuable in an executive position. Supervisor on number 7. An active, reliable man, a good gang boss or leader, very susceptible to further training. Dr. Blackford on number 7. Highest grade and finest textured of any of the foremen yet considered. He is also intelligent, honest, industrious, has high principles, is careful at his work, and will take very great pride in it. He is naturally artistic, and ought to turn out very beautiful work. He is clean morally and physically, thorough, and will always prefer a fine quality of goods and workmanship to coarse quality. He is distinctly a quality man. With training and opportunity, he ought to develop into a fine man for greater responsibility than he now carries. Analyses from photographs. Perhaps, in some ways, an even more convincing evidence of the reliability and practicability of the observational method may be found in the results obtainable by analysis from photographs. A photograph is, in a sense, a purely mechanical product. It is, in graphic form, a record of the subject's physical characteristics, stripped of all of the atmosphere, so to speak, of his personality. A photograph cannot talk, cannot act, cannot reveal the man within by any subtle appeal to what are called the intuitions. Photographs, as the basis of analysis, are used extensively in employment and vocational work. These analyses are usually written out in detail and stand, in black and white, undeniable records of the analyst's observations and conclusions. The analysis of Sidney Williams appearing on pages 206 to 210 is a sample of the definite and specific manner in which these analyses are made. It has been impossible for us to trace and verify in detail every one of these records. They are being made all the time, and in one form or another, by many of those who are now using this method. But we have traced several hundred of them for purposes of verification, and have found amongst them only 3 which have differed with the facts in the case in any essential particular. In fact, some analysts are far more reliable in making analyses from photographs than in personal interviews. In dealing with the photograph, they apply the principles and laws of the science relentlessly and almost mathematically, while, in a personal interview, they are irresistibly influenced by their sympathies, their likes and their dislikes. As a test, we have had some analyses made without even a photograph as a guide, using simply standard charts of the essential physical characteristics of the subjects. For this test 5 subjects were chosen, all of them unknown to the analysts. Their physical characteristics were charted by those acquainted with the method, and 5 copies were made of each chart. In order to give the reader an idea of the nature of the data upon which these analyses were made, we reproduce here, in ordinary language, the information contained in the chart made out for subject number 1. Sex, male. Nationality, Scotch. Occupation, teacher. Date of birth, March 19, 1891. Color, eyes, medium. Hair, skin and beard, slightly brunette. Form, forehead, eyes, mouth and chin, plain. Nose, strongly convex. Height, 5 feet 9½ inches. Weight, 145 pounds. Build, square-shouldered, bony and muscular, lacking somewhat in adipose. Consistency of flesh, hard elastic. Flexibility of joints, rigid elastic. Long trunk, short legs. Nose section of face predominates, chin a close second, mouth third. High, wide, long, medium square head. Middle division of cranium predominates, top second, base third. Crown section of cranium largest, front section, second, back section, third, temporal, fourth. Square forehead, medium wide, more prominent at the brows than above. Expression somewhat grim. Health good, body, clothes, hands and mouth clean and in good condition. Hands square. Fingers medium long, with square tips, well-rounded, sensitive pads and short nails. Thumbs long and set low on hand. The information as to the other 4 subjects was similar in character. One of these charts was then sent to Mr. G.C.B., another to Mr. C.F.R., another to Miss E.W.R., another to Mrs. A.W., and the fifth to Miss M.O.P., students of this science, 2 of them having studied it less than 1 year. Each analyst was asked to make his analysis according to a definite plan, so that the results could be definitely compared. These results are shown in the table on pages 356 and 357. Herein is the true answer to the serious question with which we opened this chapter. Whether or not reliable analyses can be made by the observation of physical characteristics is no longer debatable. Such analyses are being made.